Jennifer Game is the lead Senate candidate for One Nation in South Australia. How are you, Jennifer?
Good morning, Ricky. Very well, thank you.
Now, you must be buoyed by One Nation's first win of a seat in the South Australian Parliament, no less by your daughter.
Look, the whole party's been, delighted to see us win our first seat, and especially in the upper house. So, it's a lot of hard work, as you know. But yes, we're very happy.
There's been a lot of commentary around the Flow Studios about the One Nation satire videos, the cartoons that go around, a little bit South Park style. They're getting a lot of attention on social media, but now the AEC have stepped in regarding the latest episode. We've seen it, but you can't find it anywhere on the internet. Is that right?
I think that it's been temporarily withdrawn. I'm not sure. I haven't seen it, or you haven't heard it or seen it. But I think it was. I understand it was maybe critical about some aspect of the election process, so not appropriate, I think. So anyway, probably have to ask somebody else who's better informed.
Yeah, they're very edgy videos. Like, I think they're getting a lot of attention for One Nation and drawing some policy points. But I guess that's the nature of that kind of satire. Sometimes it has to be edgy. But does it concern you that the Electoral Commission can, during an election campaign, step in and stop your free speech, I guess, in sharing your views about the electoral process?
The cartoons were aimed at young people, engaging people who maybe are not yet, embracing the political process. And, we support the AEC. The timing of these videos, mightn't have been right on this one, but it'll be, come back. Obviously, I am concerned about, free speech generally, but not in this case.
All right. Look, when we look at the policy brochure that came to people's letterboxes, it's quite comprehensive. And we actually started from the back first because there was some interest from our listeners about the life policies. Can you just outline what One Nation's policies are on life issues?
So I think we are a pro-life, party. By that, I mean in respect of from the moment that a child's viable. So from 22 weeks and 6 days onwards, we think that the current law is inadequate in South Australia, and we just wanted to put our position on late-term abortion, which I personally I oppose unless there are very strong grounds, almost for the mother or in the child's case. But the current position of simply a choice, no, I reject that. So the position is, if I go through it, we think that there ought to be limits on this, and certainly not up until the day of birth, unless there was some extraordinary circumstances that were medically agreed. We're against sex-selective abortion. We want counselling. There's no counselling in the current law. We think that mothers who are perhaps without housing or in domestic violence situations or needing drug rehabilitation, they ought to be helped with those things rather than choosing abortion. If those are the reasons, we think the rights of the father haven't been taken into account. We think that babies who are born alive during abortion should be treated to be kept alive, not as they are now, simply left to die. We think the doctors ought to have the right to object to doing this, and we certainly don't think that tissue from aborted babies should just be up for sale to anybody. So we want a ban on organ harvesting, and we want mandatory data reporting, which the current legislation doesn't offer. So we just broadly oppose the late-term abortion bill that went through in 2020.
Now, I guess the torch, in a sense, would have to be carried by Sarah Game in relation to this in the state parliament. This brochure you've released nationwide, I imagine, is about policies state and federal. But I guess the Medicare funding is the key touchstone here. Is, I guess, at a federal level, there might be something that could be done about the Medicare funding on those topics?
Well, when I last looked, it was about $50 co-payment for an abortion, so you can have one anywhere at a very low cost. So that would be that would be one matter to consider. I know that she plans to talk about this issue, I think in her maiden speech, which is coming up. I don't know what her position precisely will be, but I can only say we're a pro-life policy, party. I think we're the only one in South Australia with such a policy, which is a real indictment on the other parties.
Well, that's one reason I asked, is because it does stand out amongst the other parties. But another policy that stands out is the policy there on dams when it comes to water. Now, I guess the capability to put dams in South Australia is limited, but what is generally One Nation's policy about, I guess, water and water storage so that we've got what we need when we need it for primary production?
So I think you're right. The easy places to put dams, we're largely a flat country in South Australia, and so the opportunities are limited. But we don't think that there's been enough investment in water generally, and so it has to be looked at a case-by-case basis. But, we've got the government putting low-flow bypasses on dams over a certain size, and we've got them going around and telling farmers that if they don't put them on now at the government's cost, that they'll have to put them on later at their own cost, and that is reducing dryland farmers' ability to, make the best use of their land and the water that falls on it. And there's no evidence that the water that's captured is actually doing any good for the environment anyway.
Well, I think there's been more than $1 billion invested in South Australia on the desalination plant. Is that being used sufficiently to provide, say, Adelaide's metropolitan needs? Should that be turned on more regularly?
So I think we all know that big white elephant, and it's not actually very far from me, where I live. One of the reasons it's so costly is that there has to be, it requires so much electricity, and the electricity has to come from renewable sources. So it's not doing us any good at all at the moment, and it's a total white elephant. If we had cheap electricity in South Australia, which we don't, then that might be viable. But until we move away from weather-dependent sources of electricity, we're never going to make that work.
Now, I want to come back to energy in a moment. Just lastly on water, South Australian Labor Premier Peter Malinauskas says he wants to see the 450 gigalitres delivered down the Murray under the Basin Plan. That's opposed by the National Farmers Federation. What's the One Nation position on that 450 gigalitres?
The problem is that all of this water that's brought back comes back from high security water licences that are used for creating our food. And every time those licences are bought, people stop farming in that area, stop employing people, towns start dying and can get to a critical point where people, they're just in decline. And we don't support, we simply don't support that. We think that a lot of that water could be gained for South Australia by doing more work to turn around the drains in the southeast of South Australia. There's a bit of debate about whether or not or how much more water can be gained that way, but we think that there can be more water. I mean, I've been down there recently, and the amount of water gushing out of the barrages is unbelievable, and we're not capturing any of that water in the good times at all in South Australia. So I know the government is paying for people to build storage dams, so where they've got a water allocation that they can store water, particularly for tree type farming or vineyards, so they don't lose their water. But we need to do a lot more. Totally. No, I'm not for more water being taken from the northern states, and I don't want any water taken from South Australia at all, and we would defend that down. Yeah, we defend that to the end.
Well, Tony Passon, the member for Barker for the Liberal Party, told us he estimates there's about 32 gigalitres out of that 450 that would have to come out of South Australia, which he says is the equivalent of mothballing Renmark's irrigation area. So there is some substantial impact to be had in SA if that 450 is to be delivered, without reference to, I guess, the social and economic impacts in South Australia.
As far as we're concerned, there's no water. There's no water coming out of farmers' high security licences here. I mean, South Australians are the best, they're the gold standard for water use. They've always They've always counted their water straight out of the Murray, unlike New South Wales where they count it when it finally gets to their farm through open channels. We've always had, our piped water, so there's no loss or minimal loss from evaporation. I mean, it's the northern states, particularly New South Wales, that needs to pick its act up, and they know that. They've oversold their water. They don't meter their water properly, and they don't meter it till it gets to the farm. No, nothing coming out of South Australia, not while we're around anyway.
Okay, well, lastly, I just wanted to come back to that comment on energy policy. What's One Nation's position on, say, whether it's coal or nuclear? Are you agnostic as to where Australia's energy comes from? I noticed Germany backtracking during the Ukraine crisis and going back into coal because of their energy shortages there.
So the party policy is that until renewables can be shown to provide, until the electricity grid is stable, which it's not at the moment because we've got too much weather-dependent electricity coming in, that we should build a coal-fired power station to buy time, which is what the Germans have done. And we want a debate on nuclear energy because it has a lot of benefits, and I'm not talking about storage of nuclear waste here for the other states, and I'm not talking about storage internationally either, but for us, we could run that desal plant all the time, probably on nuclear energy, and we could lower electricity prices here and bring manufacturing back, because the kind of manufacturing that we need is going to involve us having high-quality steel and glass, aluminium, and nitrates, and all of those require something like 40% of their input costs as electricity. And while we've got unstable and high costs, no one's going to keep investing in those areas for us. So I think nuclear is something we need a really good public debate about, and a plebiscite after we've had the yes and no case put to South Australians.
Well, Jennifer, again, great to cover a whole range of policy there. Thanks very much for your time today. And we look forward to catching up with the candidates in Barker and Grey as well.
Very kind, Ricky. Thanks very much.